So yes, take your studies seriously. Okay, the suggested readings have to be read by you. Otherwise, me lecturing here for one whole hour will not make any changes. Okay, I told you guys in the very beginning. Okay, when I started taking classes with you guys on jurisprudence, that whenever I share something here, any reading, any video, do not keep them pending. Watch them alongside the discussions that go on here in the class. Okay, otherwise later on they will make much less sense than they do now. So I would request once again, because we are not meeting face to face, I'm not able to impose that on you either. So I suggest that you guys please go through. I implore that you guys watch, and also I've been sharing readings. Go through them, because at this stage I don't want to force feed you guys anything. I assume that you guys are reasonable, as all these thinkers that we studied talk about, that human beings have reason in them. Okay, so you let reason prevail and not passion. Okay, as Zeno talks about. Okay, so those are not just for the sake of class discussions. Those are things, at least what you learn here in the natural law school, are things that are also to be experimented and applied in your own lives. So please take it seriously. So I think we in the last class we were discussing about Locke, and we stopped at Locke's idea of natural law. So yes, he says in essays on the law of nature and in second treatise that it's very plain to anyone. Okay, the law of nature, or natural law as we call it, okay, is manifest to anyone, that nothing can be plainer than this. Okay, then he also says that natural law, as is the case, as has been the case so far, cannot be traced from opinions, because opinions will vary from place to place. Okay, opinions are quite often self-serving. It cannot be customs, because customs also emerge in different times, in different places, in different ways. Okay, so customs, traditions cannot also tell you what natural law is, nor will you find it even in the, not necessarily that you find it in the legislated laws, because quite often you see not just individuals but an entire nation flagrantly violate natural laws. Example being of that of Nazi Germany, as we discussed the other day. So yes, you will not find natural law there either. Okay, then he said, as we discussed in the last class, was that it's not even innate in human being, unlike the other thinkers that we discussed. The metaphysical natural law that we discussed so far were the ones, they were the ones who would say that if you close your eyes and contemplate, you will come to know of what is natural law, because it's innate in you. You do not need to look outside to know what's natural, but you need to look within to know what's natural. So yes, that was another approach. But for John Locke, because he is an empiricist, he's a pioneer in empiricist. He is the person who probably, you can say, laid the foundation of empiricism, which was taken to extremes by George Berkeley, an Irish philosopher, but we're not going there. So yes, his idea of empiricism definitely plays a part in how we come to know of what is natural law. Okay, so in essay concerning human understanding, he says that truth of natural law had to be discovered by proper exercise of reason on material provided by senses. So yes, reason is important, but reason in the absence of what you perceive in the world through your sensory organs, okay, will not be sufficient enough. Okay, you have to be able to apply your reason to something, and without being able to apply your reason to something, you will not come to a conclusion about anything. Those will merely be your opinions. Okay, so that's what he says, that's why he's an empiricist. So that's why I have shared those videos with you guys, that you should understand what empiricism is essentially all about. So, but then he says that he's not saying that, okay, that it's all merely about perception. Okay, no, it's not merely about perception. You also have to apply your reason on what you perceive. On the other hand, it is not merely about reason, but also of the world that you perceive. Okay, so he says, without which, okay, reason, without the perception, I mean, reason is as helpless as a laborer working in the darkness behind the shuttered windows. Okay, so if you are working in the darkness behind shuttered windows, you as a laborer, you will not be able to do anything. Okay, so that's what happens to reason in the absence of experiences in the world. Okay, so that's essentially what he says. Okay, now what is the role of reason then? Okay, why would merely perception be not enough? Because he would say that perception merely gives you some kind of information, but you also need to process and interpret that information that you get. Okay, so that's what you need reason for. Okay, the what you perceive in the world has to make sense. Okay, that's how you could probably make a distinction between a human and a robot, that it can probably perceive the world. It has its own way of processing, but does it understand what it means? Okay, so that's what makes us human different, because we have this specific capacity of reasoning, and it is common to all. Okay, because God has created everyone equal, as we will come to in a while. Okay, so he says that the role of reason is that of a passive discursive faculty. Okay, it's a passive discursive faculty which advances from things known to things unknown and argues from one thing to another in a definite fixed order of propositions. Okay, it basically reveals the magnificent harmony of the visible structure. So what happens, what he's saying is that you need to have the information about the world, but you have limited information about the world. It's not about everything, but you are able to proceed from those limited information to something else. So he says advances from things known to things unknown. So for example, when you observe something here, okay, from that you come to any inductive conclusion, and then from that inductive conclusion you can deduce and apply to other hypothetical situation later on. Okay, how do you do that? Your reasoning capacity helps you in doing that. Okay, so this is what he is talking about. So natural law for him is also out there. Okay, it exists. Okay, God has created natural law. Natural law, or the laws of nature, are an outcome of God's will. Okay, and your reason, your capacity of reasoning, okay, when it is applied to the physical world around you, you are able to trace God's will, and that's what natural law is. Okay, so I hope you guys have understood how his idea of empiricism is related to the idea of natural law that he talks about. Is that clear? I mean, is it understandable what he's saying? If you guys think that there is a problem with what he's saying, you guys can raise that as well, because you have to indulge with his with his philosophy. You may like to disagree as well. So okay, then I assume that it is clear to you. And also, as I say this, as we discuss this, try and apply these things that you hear here to your own life, because I don't know about the other schools. Yes, that you will apply in a very legal context, but this is something, the natural law directly applies to you at your personal level. Okay, so apply this to your own life. See whether you can really come to conclusions about what is the right thing to do without experience, or whether experience is necessary for you to come to right conclusion about what is the right thing to do. So he further says, okay, he establishes this relationship between humans and God. He uses the word man, so it assume means humans. Okay, so what is the relationship between humans and God? Okay, he says that, okay, just the way a potter can use the clay, okay, to create, some pot, okay, we stand in the same relationship with that of God, okay. So God makes us out of something of the same sort, okay. So maybe some soil or something, okay, earth. God made human from earth, whatever, okay. um, so because God created us, we are in a certain relationship of the same sort with the God, okay. So a potter who creates a pot out of the clay, the pot belongs to the potter, okay. And because man is the product of God's workmanship, okay, man is also property and subject to the will of the God, okay. So this is the reason he gives, that to justify why we are subject to the will of the God, okay. So natural law is God's command, in the sense that God's will. And you may ask this question, that why am I bound by God's will or God's command, okay. Then what answer will John Locke give you? He is going to tell you that you are creation of God, and you therefore are in some kind, you therefore are a kind of property of God, and you have to therefore follow God's command, okay. That's the reason you're God's property, and you are subject to the will of the God, okay. So so whatever purpose that you have on this, in this existence, okay, whatever purpose that you have in your existence is the purpose that is given to you by God. Just the way a potter creates a pot for a certain purpose, okay. A pot has a certain purpose, maybe to store water or whatever it is. The potter gives purpose to the pot. So does God to you when God creates you. So yes, so God has given you the ends, and you have to reach those ends, okay. So that's the reason that you have to follow natural law, okay. So God has given you certain immutable laws, okay. So he says that God's order through immutable laws to universal law of nature. These immutable laws, okay, that God has given to you are binding on you, okay, not just you, to all men, because all men are, when I use the word men, I'm just exactly using the word, means everyone, okay, all humans, okay. So that's what he essentially says, okay, that everyone is the creation of God, everyone. So hence the idea of equality among men. By that I also mean woman. So yes, so who are we, the creation, okay, of God, to make distinction, to discriminate between God's creation? We are in no position to discriminate between God's own creation. So it's not justifiable for us to say that humans are unequal. So yes, maybe humans are born in unequal situation, but then we are not to treat them unequally, because they are all God's creation, okay. They are all God's property, including you. So that's what he says, and hence the obligation to follow the natural law which has been given to you by God itself, okay. So that's the new justification that he gives why you are bound by the command of the God, okay. Now one question that nonetheless remains, okay, is why, okay. So suppose you may further raise this question. So fine, I accept that, okay. Some might want to disagree, okay. Like me, I being an atheist, I don't believe that I'm a creation of such an agent. But anyway, if I were to agree, and if we were all to agree that we are creation of God, then just because I have been created by God, will that be reason enough for anyone to say that I am bound by the bound by what God says, okay. So what could be the reason for that, okay. So that's where we are a little unsure what Locke actually meant there. What Locke actually meant there. Now, why am I saying that? If you remember earlier, we looked at two different approaches. When we discussed about I think, Grotius, okay, that where does that obligation to follow what God says come from? Okay, is it because it's merely something that the God has willed, or is it because what the God has willed is rational? Okay, so that's something that we are not very sure about, Locke, where he stands. Okay, he says that okay, because it is what God says, so he seems to be very voluntarist, in the sense that he is depending on God's will. Okay, but is that the reason enough, or is it also because what the God willed is also reasonable? Okay, so where does our obligation come from? Is it like, even when God has willed that I do something, so why should I do that? Okay, is it out of my gratitude towards God, that thank you God for creating me, and because of that I'm bound by your command? If that is the case, if you're referring to gratitude, then gratitude still seems to be a value which is independent of God. So that's the problem that remains, and we do not have much certain answer to that question. So anyway, what he ultimately says is that okay, this is the will of a divine being. Okay, and by virtue of being the divine will, okay, that prescribes some very definite duties, okay, which can be other than they are, you are to follow the divine will. Okay, so there are specific instructions for behavior, that this is what you should do and this is what you should not do, and if you break that, then you are going against the laws of nature. So that's essentially how he talks about the laws of nature. Now, a question that we discussed in the other class as well is about how can we be, how can we be truly free? Okay, so he says, okay, John Locke says that all men are born equal and free. So we have seen his reason for saying that all men are born equal. Okay, fine. But how can we be free? Okay, what does it mean to say that all men are born not just equal but also free? So when I say I am free, it basically means that I can do whatever I want to. So I am the author of my actions. I am the one who choose to do this and not to choose that. Okay, I am responsible for my actions. Okay, that's the idea of free will. The will that you exercise comes from within and not from outside. So if someone points a gun at your head and asks you to jump off the cliff, okay, is that an exercise of free will? um, it can be much more sophisticated than just this. Okay, but I'm not going to that extent. One would say that definitely this is not a case of free will, because there is this gun that is pointed at my head and I'm being told to jump off the cliff. Okay, so you would obviously say that in this situation I am not really free. Okay, but when we say that uh, we are under a particular law, that then law also more or less does the same thing. Okay, that that this is what you need to do and this is what you cannot do. So if I am being already told by law what I can do and what I cannot do, how can I be free? So here he says that when you think that you are truly free, okay, when you actually sometimes think that you are truly free, you are not really truly free. It is only apparent to you that you are free, but you are not truly free, because you are not exercising your true choices. Okay, so when you are under the rule of the laws of nature, you are truly free. Okay, that's what he essentially says. Okay, and when you are truly free and not merely apparently free, you are able to achieve what is known as true happiness. Okay, and God hasn't made it very difficult for you. Okay, God has not made it very difficult for you. God has given you pointers. Okay, God has given you clues to know what it is that truly leads you to your freedom, okay, in the sense that he is talking about. Okay, so he is saying that you are able to exercise pleasure and pain. Okay, now here understand this, when I'm referring to using the words pleasure and pain here, I'm not using it in the utilitarian sense. And why I'm not using it in the utilitarian sense, I'll come to that in a while. Okay, so he's saying that what actions I ought to take, okay, that you will know based on these two factors, okay, pleasure and pain. Okay, you are able to feel pleasure and pain, and that will tell you what is the right thing to do. Okay, but then here's the thing. Okay, there are things that might give you pleasure immediately. Okay, so you might get some immediate pleasure from bullying someone. Okay, you might get immediate pleasure from eating all the sweets before you, but in the long run there might be other consequences that might ensue. Okay, so you eat too much sweet, you might get diabetes later on. Still seems to be consequential, but he's not talking about it in that sense of the term. Okay, so you might get pleasure from bullying someone, but yeah, in the long run you never know what could be the outcome of it. Okay, but I'm still explaining it in the consequentialist sense of the term, but this is not what he's talking about, so wait for a while. So he's saying that yes, God has given us these two capacities of feeling pleasure and pain. Okay, so when you act, you ought to act based on these pointers given to you. That is, you do something that gives you pleasure and avoid something that gives you pain. However, there might arise situation when you need to suspend your action. Okay, you have to be able to suspend your immediate action and apply your reason. So here's the importance of reason. Okay, you apply your reason and then see whether it's it's okay to immediately get the pleasure, or should I defer it to some later pleasure. Okay, that's what he's saying. So God has given you a finite intellectual capacity. Humans are limited, finite intellectual being. If you were infinitely intellectual, then you would automatically probably you wouldn't even need to think much. You would automatically come to the right conclusion. But if that were the case, you will be just like another robot that is able to do infinite calculation. So he is saying that it is a good thing that God has done to you by giving you a finite intellectual capacity. Why is that important? Because you are now able to stop yourself, okay, before you immediately do something. Think about what will be the outcome of that action. You can suspend your action, think about what will be the outcome, and then take the right decision. And when you take the decision in that way, you are exercising what is known as free will. Okay, so I hope you guys understood the definition of free will being given here by John Locke. So he says that human freedom consists in the ability to stop desires from determining what we do until we have considered the consequences. Okay, so you cannot be driven by your immediate pleasure. Okay, sometimes it will be of help, okay, but in other times you have to be able to suspend your action. You think and cogitate and mull over the outcomes, the consequences of your action, decide on it, and then do what reason tells you. And you being able to do that is free will according to John Locke, and you are exercising your freedom when you do that. Now imagine yourself as being someone with infinite capacity of reasoning. Okay, you wouldn't have that option. Okay, so you wouldn't have free will. It will be almost robotic, as John Locke will say. So that's how he is trying to define freedom. I know you guys know that some of you might find this little problematic in the way he's trying to explain it here, but yeah, this is what he is saying. Okay, so is the idea of freedom clear to you? Freedom and free will clear to you? The way, with the limited vocabulary I have, I tried to explain to you. Is it clear? Any confusion? Okay, only few students. Others, like it's clear to you, but others, what about others? Let me tell you, these are not that easy, or, you know. But yeah, if I get such response, then very encouraging. But please go through this again. Okay, I have shared the readings. Go and read it there. Think about it. That is more essential than merely agreeing to what I am saying. Locke has said. So yes, definitely go through the readings and watch other videos maybe to get some more clarity. So this is the idea of free will that he is talking about. But I do not agree with what he says. Okay, uh, I think these are post hoc explanations of human condition. Okay, that we do not have any better explanation, so we are saying that this is the reason why it is, so as to justify the existence of God. So anyway, he further talks about, okay, so what if idea of freedom is clear to you, then we'll proceed to what is a moral conduct. Okay, what is the right thing to do? Okay, he says that a moral conduct will be a conduct which is in conformity to the law given by superior will. Okay, so here the superior will is of that of God. So your morally right conduct will be what you do, whether your action is in conformity with the will given by the will of the superior. Okay, now the problem that arises is that, well, then where is my freedom? So he will say that your freedom, your exercise of your free will, your freedom lies in your action being in conformity with the command of the superior will. Okay, this is what he's saying. Something that you will find even in the categorical idea of categorical imperative that Immanuel Kant talks about. So you see, there is always some kind of inspiration one philosopher takes from another, some sort of plagiarism that you will always find. But the developments are always incremental. So yes, he says that the moral conduct is basically your conformity of your action with with the will of the superior. So there is a moral relation that exists. He says that what is that moral relation? That is the conformity or disagreement of man's voluntary actions have to a rule to which they are referred to and by which they are judged, and that rule here is God's will. Okay, so he says that the essence of moral conduct lies in conformity to law given by that superior will. So human will in itself, okay, will not be able to distinguish vice from virtue. Okay, it has to be in conformity with the divine will. But the question still remains. Okay, so is he saying that divine will is merely able to tell us what is virtue and what is vice, or is it the divine will that creates, that separates virtue from vice? Okay, that thing is still unclear to me, at least from how I have read him. Okay, so he says that reason, okay, in the absence of other things, okay, reason cannot create but merely discover the laws made by the God. Okay, so this is why, as I said earlier, although he is referring to pleasure and pain, he is not an utilitarian in the sense that pleasure and pain here merely directs you to what God has already determined to be virtue and vice. Okay, pleasure and pain calculation does not tell you what is virtue and vice. Okay, so that's why he is not utilitarian but a natural law thinker of a different kind. So he says that reason cannot create, okay, but discover the laws made by the gods. So when you exercise your reason, okay, in the light of the pleasure and pain, it merely reveals what God has already decided, because the moral law is a outcome of God's superior will. Okay, and because you have this relation of superior inferior, your action has to be in conformity with the will of the superior, and hence, okay, enforcement of that will is very much intrinsic part of that idea of law that we have talked about. Okay, because in the absence of enforcement, that superior will have no value. It's merely something, okay, you can do or you cannot do it, the choice is yours. but that cannot be the case. Okay, so that superior will, which is which is there, necessitates that enforcement also happens. So enforcement is intrinsic part of that superior will. Okay, so if what does that mean? That such a rule, okay, if you may come across, okay, if it does not follow with sanctions for not obeying, okay, for disobedience, so if it does not follow with some kind of reward or punishment, okay, then it is not law. But in this case, because it is natural law, it has to be followed by some consequences. Okay, so if you violate the natural law, there has to be some consequences, and that is very intrinsic part of the natural law. Okay, so I think I would stop it here for today. I think in tomorrow's class we can conclude. In tomorrow's class we'll talk a little bit about the relation between law, punishment. Then we will talk about rights, this idea of natural rights, and with that we can a little bit about social contract, and then we can conclude Locke, our discussion on Locke, and then we will proceed to John Finnis.